Welcome to Prophets of Babel with your host Janine as we try to finish up the record of the Great Wars from the Chronicles of the Children of Araneck. Starting with chapter 10. Now I, Araneck, say that it must be that a record be kept of all the souls that were harvested and sent unto the Father and the Son. Their number was 200,000 men, women, and children, and they were taken from around the city of Ridnan and from all over the land. Now I say that many things were done unto them that cannot be written upon these plates, for they are not pleasing unto the Lord, and I have been commanded not to write them. But I make it known that the land at this time was filled with darkness, and the evil one truly had hold of the hearts of men. Now I, Araneck, continue the record of the second great war that was waged upon the land. But I say this, that the war has never served any purpose other than to harvest souls to send unto the Father and the Son, and this was what the people did during the second great war. Now behold, those who fled out of the city of Ridnan came to the city of Klesik, and also the people of the city of Jago gathered together and made preparations and were ready to receive the followers of Odenon to battle. But it came to pass that Actar, doesn't that sound like actor? That Actar would not allow his men to go against the city of Klesik to do battle. But behold, he left his men in every city they had captured to maintain and defend them in case of attack from the people of Christ. Now, because he did not allow his men to do battle with the armies of Christ, Actar kept the greater part of his armies intact. Now, behold, because of this, he went on, taking possession of many of the cities of the followers of Christ until he had taken the city of Klesik and the city of Jago and the city of Gornives and the city of Pasco and the city of Rimla and the city of Lamish, all of which were in the east borders of the land northward, even the furthest part of the land of Ridnan, and unto the borders of the land of Morion. And so the armies of King Redneck had obtained, by the wicked skill and treachery of Actar, so many cities, all of which were strongly fortified as Zinon had commanded. Now all of these were strongholds for the armies of King Redneck. So it was that the armies of King Redneck, under the command of Actar, marched north unto the borders of the land of Ridnan, even unto the borders of the land of Morion, driving the followers of Christ or the people of Disna before them, and slaying many and causing many to fall into slavery. But it came to pass that while they marched forward north, they were met by Pheidlamed, who had killed many followers of Odenon in battle and had led his people in his flight northward. Now it came to pass that he followed Actar also, as he was marching with his army, that he might take possession of the land of Ridnan and also the land of Morion. But behold, Actar met with disappointment by being repulsed and pushed back by Pheidlamed and his men, for they were great warriors and skilled with the weapons of war, and they were also had great faith in God. Now let it be known that Pheidlamed did fight with the people of Christ. He was not of our seed, or from off this land. For behold, he was from across the sea west, from a far off land, and also he was not of our seed. He recognized the laws of God and lived them and was joined with the church of Christ. And so for us, he was one of our seed. And so it was that every man that was under his command was also from his homeland across the great sea west. Behold, every man under the command of Pheidlamed did exceed the followers of Odenon in strength and skill of war. But behold, the land from whence Pheidlamed and his people came was a continual round of warfare and violence, and he knew the ways of warfare, so much so that they did gain advantage over the armies of King Araneck. Now, although Pheidlamed did gain an advantage over the armies of King Araneck at the borders of the land of Ridnan in the north, Pheidlamed saw that Actar and his forces were determined to maintain those cities. which had taken, and those parts of the land which they had taken possession of. Upon seeing the greatness of their numbers, Fiedelman thought it was not possible, or in the best interest of his forces and kinsfolk, that he should attempt to attack them in their fortified cities and strong places, or even in open battle, so great were their number. Now Zidon, who had fled through the lands of Morion and upon the isles of the sea, so as to build up sufficient strength and faith among the people with the aid of the prophet Disna, sent orders unto Fiedelman that he should retain all the prisoners of Odenon who had fallen into his hands. For behold, as the armies of Araneck had taken many prisoners, that he, Fiedelman, should retain all the prisoners as ransom for those that had been taken by the armies of King Araneck. Now behold, I, Araneck, say unto you that Fiedelman did as Zidon commanded him, and Fiedelman always kept his kinsfolk round about him, making preparations for war and to defend himself against Actar and his men. Now Fiedelman prepared his men in the manner in which he had been taught in his homeland, by throwing up wooden walls round about and preparing places of fortification on the top of hills to the north of the land ridden at the borders of the land of Morion. Now I say that he kept preparing for war until Zidon could send sufficient forces and numbers to strengthen Fiedelman and his army. Behold, Zidon also commanded Fiedelman by way of orders sent unto him by the way of birds, that he should fortify and make secure the northern part of the land of Ridnan, and secure a stretch of gorge which would lead into the lands of Morion northward, in case the armies of King Araneck and Actar should obtain that point of the land and should have power to overtake them on every side of the land northward. Now behold, while the followers of Christ remained in the north, far north and upon the isles of the sea, Fiedelman had indeed secured a small gorge or passageway into the lands northward, and access unto the isles of the sea. Behold, because Actar could not access the land of Morion and destroy the followers of Christ, he marched with his armies to the land of Araneck and unto the king, for he had completed all that he desired, and now wanted to be king. Chapter 11. Now Actar led his armies into the city of light, in the land of Araneck, which was the capital city, in which sat the great temple upon the plains of Shannon. Now, when King Araneck saw Actar approaching down the great avenue that led to the plains of Shannon, he came out to meet him upon the ramp of the temple with his guards, for he supposed that Actar had fulfilled all his commands, and that he had defeated the followers of Christ and wiped them from off the land. But as the king came out to meet Actar, Actar caused that his lieutenants should go up the ramp to meet the king. Now they went up unto King Araneck and bowed themselves before him, as if to show reverence and respect unto him, because of his greatness and glory. Wherefore, as they did, this King Araneck raised his hand to raise them from off their knees, as was the custom, now that he had set himself up as king. Now, when the first of Actar's lieutenants had raised himself from off his knees, he lunged forward and stabbed King Araneck in the throat, and he fell to the earth with a groan, clutching the knife in his neck as he fell. Behold, when the servants of the king saw this, they became afraid and fled from the sight of the king. And the lieutenants of Actar cried aloud with a great voice, saying, Behold, the servants of the king have stabbed him in the throat, and the king has fallen, and they have fled because of their guilt. Look what they have done to our king. Now Actar commanded that his army should march forth and witness what had happened to the king. And when they came up the ramp, they found the king lying in a great pool of blood, clutching the knife within his throat. Now Actar pretended to be greatly moved by grief and with mighty anger, and said, Whoever loved our king, let him go and pursue the king's servants, that we may slay them in the same manner as they have slain our king. And behold, the army went out into the city and pursued the servants of the king. However, after having pursued them in vain, Actar, by great fraud, murder, and intrigue, gained the hearts of the people. And so it was that Actar entered the city of light with his armies and took possession of the whole city. And behold, that when Actor had taken possession of the city, he took with him the same lieutenants that killed the king and all of those that were with him, and went into the temple to see King Araneck's queen. And they each in turn, every one of them, testified unto the queen, that the king was murdered by the hands of his own servants. And they said, My queen, the servants of the king have fled. Is this not testament of their guilt? Upon hearing all of this, the queen was convinced concerning the death of the king. Now the queen had had eyes for Actor for a long while, and she eyed him to lust after him. Now Actor had sought the favor of the queen for many years, for he knew that she lusted after him, and he also lusted after her. For she was delightsome to behold, and was a woman of the world, and delighted in all the carnal nature of man. Now Actor took her to his bed, and lay with her, and on the morrow he took her to wife. Now all this was done by his fraud, and by his cunning lieutenants, and he obtained the kingdom, and was acknowledged Lord Protector throughout all the land, among all the people of Odenon, who were composed of the dissenters of the people of Araneck. Now these dissenters, having the same instruction and the same information as the people of Christ, indeed having been instructed in the same knowledge of the Lord, nevertheless it is strange to relate, not long after their dissensions, they became more hardened and impenitent, and more wild, wicked, and ferocious than any that walked the land, or who had ever walked the land, giving way to indolence and entirely forgetting the Lord. Now behold, now that Actor had taken possession of the throne, and also of Araneck's wife, he became comfortable in his place, and did not desire to lose his position. And so he commanded that his people should maintain those cities which they had taken from the people of Christ, and that they should stay within them, and not go unto war, or try to take the narrow pass that led to the lands northward, or the islands of the sea. Chapter 12. Now it was during the 8th year of the war that raged upon the land, that the followers of Christ upon the land northward, protecting the gorge, were led to the land of Morion and the isles of the sea, where under the command of Fedleman, behold, they began to realize that while the followers of Odenon held the cities they had taken and had fortified them in a great manner, that it was impossible that he could overpower them. Therefore Fedleman abandoned his designs to take them. So Fedleman decided to wait for the coming of Zinon, that he might receive strength to his army. Now Actor, having sat upon his throne for a long time, began to feel restless and fearful of the armies of Christ, for he supposed that they might attack those cities that had been taken from them in order to free them. Behold, fearing this in his heart, Actor began to prepare his armies to begin to push forward upon the armies of Christ to gain a final victory over the people of Christ. Now I say unto you that the people of Actor had moved upon all the land, so that there was little place for the followers of Christ to live free in their liberty. And it was at this time that Actor sent forth a letter unto the prophet Disna and unto Zinon to meet them in battle at the river Hode. Behold, Actor proposed that they meet for one last time, one last great battle, to decide who would hold sway over the land for all time. Actor wrote that they were to meet when the river was high, and this was to be at the end of the rainy, foggy season, at the end of the 9th season of time. Now the people of Christ had fled north, inasmuch as they had gone far north, even unto the borders of the land of Ridnan and Morion, and even upon the new islands of the sea. Interesting. Behold, upon these new islands of the sea they had built many monuments, and they had built unto themselves a small temple, so that they could worship their God. Now behold, this small temple was built in a new manner, and was not like unto any that had been built before, and it was a curious workmanship. And it is said that the angels of God himself helped in the design of this building, so that it would stand as a testament for all time of the people and their religion. For the people of Christ had filled the islands that they were upon, and they were safe. For anyone coming unto them in battle would have to cross the seas. Now this was the reason for the letter being sent unto Disnah in Zinon, for Actor knew that he could not access the gorge or passage or cross the seas, for Odanon, the god of those that had dissented from the people of Christ, forbade it. And Actor knew this and could not be seen to disobey the God they had set up amongst the people. Now, if he did do as he wished in his heart and disobeyed this God, he would seem weak, but Actor demanded blood in his heart. But he did not show weakness, for if he did, he would lose the respect of his armies and his queen. Now Zinon, the commander of the armies of Christ, under the direction of the prophet Disnah, called all the armies and generals of Christ together. Now at the commencement of the rainy season, at the end of the 8th year, Zinon and Fiedleman and many of the captains of the armies of Christ held a council of war about what they should do in order to prepare to do battle unto the armies of Odanon, that they might gain advantage over them and take again the land which was given them by God. Now it was decided that they should prepare themselves and the people for war, but it is recorded that their names were few, but filled with the faith of Christ. Now, because of this great faith that had grown among the children of Christ, Zinon called upon all men and women to join with the armies to fill their number. And so it is written that all those that could hold a sword, shield, spear, or any other weapon of war were required to join with the army and fight. Now I say unto you that this was the manner in which the people of the Almighty prepared for battle. Now the people of Christ, under the direction of Zinon and Fiedleman, moved from their islands and upon the isles of the sea, leaving only a small group behind. Now behold, when they had made landfall, they journeyed south and rode upon their horses for the space of many days, even 5 days. And when the rainy season had stopped, they found that the Lord had led them onto the field of battle. Do you think the Lord told them to do this? Because why leave your safety? This will be the second time they've left their safety to go to battle out in the open. But if the Lord led them to the battlefield, maybe there's a reason. It'd be nice to understand, huh? Chapter 13. It has a preface. The two armies prepare for the last great battle. They gather on opposite sides of the river. The armies of Odanon chant at the armies of Christ. Zinon asks them if they are willing to fight for their children's religion and freedom. Now I, Araneck, say that this was the last great battle of the second great war that raged upon this land between the forces of darkness and the forces of light. And I make it known that it was the bloodiest of all the battles that they fought one against the other. Now this battle led to a time of peace, and that peace led to my time. Therefore I record upon this plate the last great and terrible battle of the second great war. But it must be made known that although this battle led to a great slaughter and harvest of souls, the battle that is raging outside of the temple in my time is far more destructive. But let it not be forgotten that the time of the Second Great War was one of the greatest darkness, for not only was there bloodshed, but also secret works and organizations that fought to enslave and take away people's lives and sought to control the way that the people lived. Behold, all who would not do as the evil King Araneck and his successor Actar commanded were put to death, or were defiled and made slaves. And no time in the history of my people, not even the time I live in now, was as dark and evil and depraved as those. Now I say that the people were gathered to war, one side against the other, and they were arrayed in battle armor, both men and women, and they met at the river Hodea, as had been the desire of Actar. Now the worshippers of Odanon gathered their armies together, and they had a great horse guard, and they outnumbered the armies of Christ, commanded by Zinon 4-1. Behold, the armies of Odanon, led by their ruler Actar, were gathered on the right side of the river, and they were situated atop a small hill. Now the armies of Zinon were on the left bank of the river with a forest to their backs, and the river Hodea separated the two armies. Now, there was a coruscant over the river, and upon this coruscant were towers, and it was the way of the people of that time to pay to cross the river. Now the two armies were gathered to do battle, and the armies of Odnon, under the command of their king Aktar, began to shout at the armies of the Christ and unto Zion, and they shouted at them, saying, your women are tender to hold, your children are flavorsome to eat. Now we are the mighty, we are the strong, and we feast upon the weak. And we do it with a song. Ode and on, oh, ode and on. We thank thee for our strength. Now the armies of the people of Christ stood firm in their faith, and Zion led them, and he did so in the name of the Almighty Christ. And he rode out at the head of his people and spoke these words unto them. It is for our God we fight this day, for if we should fall upon this field today, then the whole land will slip into darkness, and the precepts of the Almighty will be lost forever. And if we fail this day, the records that we have kept and our many religious practices will become a thing of naught, and they will be lost for all time. And the remainder of the people that will be left will slip into an age of darkness, murder, and hatred. So it is down to us to be victorious this day, not for our own sakes, but for the sake of our children and their children, so they may worship the Almighty in love and freedom. Are we willing to fight for him? With this, the armies of Christ gave out a great cheer of Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna to the Most High God. Now once Zion had heard this, he, along with Fieldman, who was now his most trusted general, led his forces forward into battle. Chapter 14. The two armies clash at the coruscant. Fieldman's archers surprise the army of Odnon. Fieldman and Aktar engaged. Now Zion's armies were arrayed for battle thus. At his rear were 4 battalions of archers commanded by Momanan. In the middle of his forces were many men upon horseback commanded by Dakmanar. On the right were many men with swords, axes, spears, and shields commanded by Limdotana. And on his left were the remainder of his forces, which were made up of men, women, many young men still in their youth, who had volunteered to fight because of the teachings of their mothers in faithfulness and service, and the kinsfolk of Fieldman, and they were led by Fieldman himself into battle. And all these forces were commanded by Zion himself. Now behold, the forces led by Fieldman were given swords, axes, and shields, and they were arranged in an arc with the horse guard in the center and Zion leading them all from the front. Now the armies of the worshippers of Odnon were arrayed for battle thus. For behold, they had no armor about them except for their king and commander, Aktar, for they were arrayed only in a cloth about their loins, the skin of bears and of other beasts of the forest about their bodies. Their faces were covered in the blood of their victims. Their hair was drenched in the blood of the children and the women who they had raped and murdered. And the same was to be said of their hands, except they had the parts of the children upon their fingers. Now their weapons were painted red, so that it might frighten the armies of God. Behold, this army of Odnon did not possess any machines of war, for Aktar believed he did not need them to defeat such a small band of fighters. But the armies of God did not fear them, for they were arrayed in armor of silver, bronze, lead, and xanthan, and they were covered from head to toe, so that they might be protected from the blows of the weapons of the worshippers of Odnon. Now behold, the worshippers of Odnon, seeing that the forces of Zion had made great ground toward the coruscant, moved down from their position on the hill. And they had started to approach the coruscant. Now Aktar knew, as did Zion, that whoever held the coruscant would win the battle and ultimately the war. Knowing this, Aktar commanded that his armies should move with great speed to take the coruscant. Now, they moved with great speed toward the courtesan, and they thought that they would take it with ease and with that win the war. Now, believing they had taken the courtesan before the followers of Christ, they lowered their shields and walked toward the courtesan. However, unknown to them, hidden in the towers of the courtesan were soldiers of the armies of Christ, put there during the darkness of the night. Now, this was an idea given unto Zion by Fiedleman, for it is recorded that this had worked for him before in his own land when fighting a great war. So Zion, trusting the genius of Fiedleman, ordered that it be done. Now, when the worshippers of Odin approached the courtesan, and the armies of Christ within the towers let fly with arrows of fire, and they rained down upon the armies of Actar. And they became confused, for they did not know where the arrows were coming from. Now Actar, seeing this from the hill, rode down to the head of his forces and began to rally his men. And he pushed forward until he came to the entrance of the courtesan. And he cast his eyes toward the other end of the courtesan, and he beheld the forces of Zion, and he beheld Philemon. Now Actar's heart longed to kill him, for not only did Actar see him as polluting influence upon his bloodline and his people, he knew that if he did kill Philemon, the Zion's forces would be affected, as would Zion. For he knew that Zion then loved Philemon as a brother, and his loss would greatly affect the armies of Christ. Now Actar, having a lust for the blood of Philemon, began to move his people on to the courtesan. As Actar moved upon the courtesan, so did Philemon and his armies and his forces, and they began to do battle, and came across the armies of Odin and Actar with a great force, insomuch that they did slay many of them with a great slaughter, and drive them off the courtesan. And now the armies of Odin began to flee, even in a great number, and they began to fall back from off the courtesan. But behold, Actar and Philemon were engaged in a fierce battle. Now Philemon began to overpower Actar. Behold, Philemon carried with him into battle a spear from his homeland that he had used in battle, and that was special unto him. And he, having given Actar a sore battle, cast the spear at Actar, which did pierce him near the heart. But this did not kill him, but he was mortally wounded. Now Philemon, seeing that Actar was wounded near to death, rode forward to finish Actar off. But as he rode forward unto Actar, the king of the people of Odin, he began to awaken from near death, insomuch that he did thrust his sword into the heart of Philemon, and he slew Philemon as he fell from his horse onto the courtesan. Philemon cried out, I come home, Father. Chapter 15. The fighting continues, and the ground flows red with blood. Araneck prophesies of the tribulation at the end times. Now I make it known that the courtesan was old, and it was beginning to heave at the weight that was put upon it, and it cracked in the middle and fell into two pieces. And with this Actar, who was at the head of his forces, and who was wounded unto death by Philemon, by way of his spear, fell with his horse, which had also been wounded, into the river, and he began to drown, for the weight of his armor was more than he could bear. And he fell, crying out, saying, my God, my God. And so it was that in death Actar did call upon the God of his forefathers. Now having seen Actar fall into the river, he also saw Philemon lying upon the floor of the broken courtesan. And so it was that when Zion saw that Philemon was dead, he was greatly affected by sorrow, and he began to cry, for behold, he had been a man who had fought valiantly for a country not of his own, and he was a true friend to Zion, and also to liberty, and he had suffered very many afflictions during the great struggle. Behold, Zion was in sorrow, and for he knew that Philemon had died, not being able to do so in his own country and upon his own land. And this moved Zion to cry unto the Lord, saying, peace be unto the land of Philemon, peace be unto him and his people. But behold, Philemon was dead, and had gone the way of all the earth, even into the arms of God. Now Zion, having said goodbye to his friend with a very heavy heart, beheld that the forces of Odnon were in disarray. Seeing this, Zion commanded his forces to cross the river, and upon this they reached the other side and gave battle to the forces of Odnon. And they made a figure of 2 circles around them, and they gave great battle. And I include in this record the words of Zion that say, although the armies of Odnon were wicked and despised of God, they did fight well, and with much strength and much courage. Now the battle went on for the space of many hours, and much blood was spilt, so much so that the river became red with the blood of all those that had fallen. And the records say that the ground was so heavy with blood that it stuck to everything they wore. Now, because of the loss of Akhtar, the forces of Odnon began to be afraid, and they became unorganized, and they were being hewn down with every sword and axe blow, and the slaughter was great, and the ground became filled with blood, and the sun baked it so that it became hard, and the forces of Odnon began to flee to the hill Doan. Now Zion, who by this time commanded the towers that were still standing, commanded that his archers fire upon the hill, and that his horse guard and the forces that had been commanded by feeblemen, which consisted of the faithful youth, go up unto the hill and finish off the forces of Odnon. Now when the horse guard and the forces of the late feeblemen came to the very top of the hill, they found only a few of the worshippers of Odnon still alive. Although only a few in number, even 100, they gave battle unto the horse guard and forces of the late feeblemen, until the armies of Christ overpowered them, and Dachmanar commanded his horse guard to cut their throats and spill their bowels upon the floor, as was commanded to do to the traitors of the Almighty. Now the record of the Second Great War, or as the people of Christ call it, the Great Struggle, say that the blood flowed down the hill, and that the hill became red with blood, so that the grass beneath could not be seen. And behold, the hill that was once called Doan was called from that day forward Hill Fuil. Now I, Araneck, do testify that although the details of this war are bloody and evil, they are nothing compared to the slaughter that is going on now. For my people have forgotten their God, and the whole land is covered in the blood of the dead. And as I write this record and read about the Second Great War, my heart desires that my people were as righteous as the people of the prophet Disna. But I fear for your time more than I fear for mine. For your time will be 7 times worse than mine. For your time will see great tribulation. For I have seen these things, and an angel of the Almighty has shown me many things, even the great darkness that will engulf your land. But I am not permitted to make an account here on these plates, for this is the record of my people. But a few of these things are to be found on the religious record. Chapter 16. Now I return to the record of the details of the Second Great War. Now Dachmanar signaled that the horse guard and the men of late Feidlimon had won the battle. Upon seeing the signal from Dachmanar, Zion rode forward atop the hill Doan, and stood and raised his sword and cried with a loud voice, saying, This day, in the name of the Almighty Christ, we covenanted that we will never spill a drop of blood again upon this land. We make this covenant not just for ourselves, but for our children and our children's children. This hill will stand as a testament of our great struggle, and from this day until the end of time shall be called Fuil, so that it is an ever constant reminder unto us the cost of persevering peace upon the land. Now we raise our hands unto the heavens for him who has given us this victory. Hosanna to the Most High God. With this, the armies of the people of Christ shouted out Hosanna 3 times. How many weeks? Now many weeks passed, and Zion took his forces back into the lands of their ancestors, and they took with them the prophet Disna and all the elders of the church and the new heads of the 5 houses. And thus ended the great struggle over the land. Now they had wars, bloodshed, famines, and affliction for the space of many years. And there had been murders, contentions, dissensions, and all manner of iniquity among the people in the land. However, for the sake of the righteous and the sake of the people of Christ, and because of their prayers, they were spared by the Almighty Christ. Now behold, because of the length of the war between the people of Christ and the worshippers of Odin, many had become hardened because of the great length of the war, but many were also softened in their hearts because of their afflictions, so many so that they did humble themselves before God, even in the depth of humility. Now when they were traveling from place to place and from city to city unto the capital city, their hearts became heavy, for there was much evil that had been done upon the face of the land. Behold, the great city of Ridnon had been burnt and made a ruin. Even the great council chamber of Ridnon, that was a wonder unto the world, stood no more. Behold, Ridnon had stood as a jewel unto the people, but it stood no more, other than a ruin. Now the prophet Disna commanded that the army and the elders of the church, along with the heads of the 5 houses, remain in Ridnon and rebuild the heart of the religious capital of the people. Now, there were many people that lay dead throughout the land, and it is hard for me to write the things which they saw, for their records are full of the evil that they saw, but it is sufficient for me to say that their hearts were very sad and very heavy, and many tears were shed. Now Disna, who was still a prophet of the people, saw the great destruction that had been done by the worshippers of Odin, and he commanded Zinon and the army to find from amongst the people those willing and skilled to help rebuild and fortify these parts of the land, which were most exposed and weak, until they were sufficiently strong. Now, when this work was underway and the people with the skills put to work, the prophet Disna desired to return to the city of light in the land of Araneck and to the people, and he asked to be accompanied by Zinon and a small detachment of the army. Now the prophet Disna made his way unto the land of Araneck, accompanied by Zinon and a small detachment of the army, which numbered 100 men. And when they came unto the city of light, behold, the prophet feared that not all the followers of Odin had been destroyed, and that they went into the city of light, and they entered and rode down the great highway of the city and unto the temple. And as they did, the remaining followers of Odin fled before them into the surrounding countryside, cursing as they went. Now the temple had been desecrated, and it was adorned with all manner of things unpleasing to God. Now as they entered the temple, they made their way to the great council chamber. Behold, when they had entered the great council chamber, they found that the great seal of the Urim and Thummim had been desecrated, and that the records of the people had been burned and mutilated. And they found seated on the throne, erected by Araneck, the queen of the people of Odin. When Disna saw her, he approached her, but she was no more, for she was dead. Now there were no signs of a wound upon her body, but her face was white and thin, and her beauty was no more. Behold, it was assumed by Disna that she was poisoned by Actar, and so Actar had murdered the wife of Araneck by deception. Now it was known that the queen had desired peace and wanted to sign a peace with the people of Christ, but Actar desired war and power, and all those that stood in his way were killed. Now the prophet was sad in his heart that one so fair had fallen into sin and gone astray from the teachings of Christ. Behold, when the prophet had administered unto the queen, he looked around the room, and the prophet Disna looked upon the temple and spoke these words: Never again must we let this happen. Never again must we let this temple be defiled by our people. Never again must our people make war upon each other. I swear unto heaven in front of these witnesses that if we ever depart from the ways of the Almighty again, that we must be wiped from off this land. Chapter 17. Now Disna went about the work of copying what he could from the records that were not destroyed by the followers of Odin. So it was that a decree went out upon the land, calling for people to come from all over the land and help sweep away the decay and death from the great cities of the people of Christ. And Disna called a great assembly, and he met the people outside the great temple, and he decreed that the orders and worship of Odin was never to be mentioned again. And he decreed the followers of Odin that had fled should be rounded up and captured and placed under the protection of the church, so that they might be taught that what they had done was an abomination unto God. And Disney proclaimed that a law be enacted that said that anybody worshiping Odnon be put to death. And Disney made it known unto the people that they were all to be known as the people of Christ, for they were to become one people in heart and mind. From that day forth, the people of Christ lived in peace and happiness, and everyone lived for everyone else. And there was once more peace established among the people of Christ and upon all the lands. And Zion yielded up the command of his army into the hands of his son, whose name was Cadman. And Zion retired unto the city of Ridnan, unto his own house, that he might spend the rest of his days in peace. Now Disney did return to the seat of the prophets, and did again preach unto the people the word of God. For because of the great struggle and many wars and contentions, it had become necessary that the church be established again throughout the land. Behold, Disney caused that once again 5 houses should run the country, and set the laws in accordance with the gospel of Christ. Therefore Disney and the elders went forth and did declare the word of God with much power and conviction unto the people of the land, and also unto the worshippers of Odnon that remained, which did cause them to repent of their sins and be baptized unto Christ. Now they did establish the church again throughout all the land, and the people of Christ prospered again upon the land, and began to multiply and to grow exceedingly strong again upon the land. Now they began to grow very rich. But even though they became strong in their riches and their strength and their prosperity, they were not lifted up in pride, neither were they slow to remember the Lord their God. No, they did humble themselves before him. Behold, they remembered how great the Lord was, and what he had done for them, that he had delivered them from death, slavery, prison, war, and that he had delivered them out of the hands of their enemies. Now, because of this, they prayed unto Christ continually, and in return, Christ the Almighty God did bless them and cause them to grow strong upon the land and prosper upon the land. And this was how it was until the time of my birth. For I, Araneck, was born in a time of great happiness and light. All right, that finishes the record of the Great War. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you've learned some lessons. Please like and subscribe to get notifications when more of these videos are posted. And thank you for joining me.